Alien is one of the biggest and most important sagas of all time. It marked Sigourney Weaver's big screen debut and transformed her into one of the most iconic action heroines in cinema that is difficult to beat. It was released on May 25, 1979, with the advertising phrase, "In space, no one can hear you scream." Those who had the opportunity to enjoy its premiere in the cinema say that the public changed seats to not be so close to the screen, and some even left the room.
Did you know that this was an R-rated movie when you brought him?
Yes, we did.
Are you sorry you brought him?
Yes, I am.
Are you glad you saw it? Movie scare you at all?
Yes, ma'am, it did. We take him to see a lot of horror pictures and things like because we like horror movies. We're horror buffs, I guess.
Would you recommend to your little friends who are your age to go see it?
No, I wouldn't.
Success was not long in coming, helped by WOM or word of mouth, since we are talking about a time when advertising did not have as many means as today with social networks. The film received 2 nominations for the Oscars, winning in the category of Best Special Effects.
The winners are H.R. Geiger, Carlo Rambaldi, Brian Johnson, Nick Alder, and Dennis Eiling for The Alien.
The main idea for Alien was conceived by Dan O'Bannon after working on the script for Dark Star together with John Carpenter. This film was about a group of people who traveled in a spaceship and had an alien as a pet. But due to the low budget, they could only represent the creature with a plastic ball and claw-like feet. Dan O'Bannon wanted to make another film with a horror and suspense tone, and with a more terrifying alien.
We had an alien in it, which was a beach ball. It was our second try on that alien. I went away from Dark Star really wanting to do an alien that looked real.
On the verge of bankruptcy and sleeping on his friend Ron Schusett's couch, inspired by old horror works, they came up with the script together for what we know today as The Eighth Passenger.
We were both starving. My wife was supporting us. We had 2 rooms. That's all we had.
Typewriter out, took it over to Ronnie. She says, "That's living room," and over the days and nights of the next 3 months, Ron keeping me alive by feeding me hot dogs.
When he received questions about who he had really copied the idea from, Dan O'Bannon declared, "I didn't steal from anyone. I stole from everyone." Although the concept of the chestburster was devised by Ronald Shusett, curiously, O'Bannon suffered from a strange illness, which caused him severe stomach pains and unfortunately was the cause of his death in 2009.
I have the answer. I said, I have the answer. The alien fucks him. He said, what? What are you talking about? I said, jumps on his face. It's a little creature then, little baby squid-like, sticks a tube down his throat, starts feeding him air, and bursts out of his chest in the middle of the movie.
While they were finishing the script for Alien, they postponed a work based on a book whose name was We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Ron Suchett had already bought the rights. The result of that script would be what we would later know as Total Recall, a futuristic film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. The original title was going to be Star Beast, but as it did not convince the producers much, and after going through several revisions, Dan O'Bannon noticed that the word alien was mentioned a lot in the script's dialogues. When the script arrived at Fox, the executive producers were not convinced to make the film, but the success of Star Wars and the fashion of the outer space genre finally decided them to approve the filming. Finally, $4.2 million were allocated for its recording. At first, Dan O'Bannon wanted to direct the film himself, but the production company refused. After trying to convince several directors, no one accepted, thinking it would be a typical B-class monster movie. Finally, it was offered to Ridley Scott, a commercial director with only 1 film experience, The Duelists, a historical drama film, where the great Harvey Keitel acts. Scott, after reading the script, agreed to direct it. Ridley Scott, known for being a methodical and detail-oriented director, he made some first storyboards to present to Fox. Inspired by the recent science fiction releases, 2001, A Space Odyssey, Star Wars, and taking the Texas Chainsaw Massacre into the horror genre, it impressed the executives so much that they decided to double the budget, $8.4 million. In the original script, all the crew members were names of male characters, although they had clarified that they were only generic names and that it did not influence anything if they changed gender. That is why they are simply called by their last name. What they never imagined is that the undisputed protagonist of the entire saga would end up being a woman. Sigourney Weaver was one of the last actresses to audition for the role of Ellen Ripley. Although she had little experience in the world of cinema, and with only a few weeks left before filming began, she had her screen tests on the sets of the Nostromo ship.
Action.
Parker.
The egg used in the advertising posters is different from the one we see in the film, since in the beginning they made the recordings with simple chicken eggs. The name of the ship, Nostromo, was taken from the novel by Joseph Conrad, as well as the name of the shuttle, Narcissus. Ron Cobb and Chris Foss were in charge of the illustrations of how the spaceship would look. Although they did not know what the final aesthetic of the film would be, they did take their designs on the interiors to make the sets on the recording sets. These presented an industrial-style design thinking of a logical operation. They even designed futuristic signage posters that we can see throughout the film. They also made the first sketch of what the alien would be like, but as we know, it was discarded. The model of this coffee grinder is the same one we see in the movie, Back to the Future, to recreate the DeLorean fusion generator. In this hallway, to create the illusion that it was longer, mirrors were placed. And in this scene, we see how the actors are reflected. The ship's computer has the initials MUTUR. That is why they simply name it as Mother.
Mother wants to talk to you.
The android Ash was not written in the script, and for Dan O'Bannon, his inclusion did not add or contribute anything. The idea was from David Giler and Walter Hill, members of the production. The iconic scene of the head on the floor was represented with noodles, marbles, fiber optic cables, caviar, and milk. Since Sigourney Weaver is tall, she had to bend down in some scenes while walking through the ship to avoid hitting her head on the ceiling. 4 identical cats were used to represent Jones. Weaver had allergic reactions that she thought were due to cat hair, but in reality, it was the combination of the glycerin applied to simulate sweat. Brian Johnson and Nick Alder were the special effects supervisors for the film. They were responsible for making many of the film's equipment and elements work, like the hypersleep chambers, the moving chairs, the motion detectors, the flamethrowers, and the Jones box. The assembly and creation of the ship was built at Shepperton Studios in London. All the rooms were connected to each other to give the feeling of claustrophobia in the sealed ship. The interior sets are airplane parts and scrap metal that they bought in a London cemetery. The leg of the ship was about 18 meters high, but to give the feeling of greater size, small spacesuits were built to be used by Ridley Scott's children and a son of a member of the production. They also participated in the scene where they enter the pilot's chamber to give the sensation of a more imposing size. Dan O'Bannon recommended H.R. Geiger, after seeing his illustrations in the book Necronomicon, to be in charge of designing everything related to the extraterrestrial world. Although the executive producers were not convinced by the strange art because of its diabolical and sexual connotations, Ridley Scott agreed and was convinced that he was the right one.
The book, Necronomicon, okay, Los Angeles, in fact by O'Bannon, who brought it in, and I nearly fell off the desk. It was as simple as that. I've never been so certain about anything in my life.
That is how he was the creator of the interior and exterior of the alien ship, the eggs with the facehuggers and the pilot, who we would later know as an engineer. And he also participated in its creation, since in addition to being a draftsman, he was a sculptor. Much of Geiger's inspiration came from Egyptian culture, as a child, he visited a museum where he was totally fascinated. The executives did not want to approve the construction of the pilot's chamber, since it was too expensive and would only be used in one scene of the film. Ridley Scott wanted to do everything in detail and continued requesting budgets for the construction of new sets, which only made production more expensive and delayed filming. This sculpture was on display at the Egyptian theater during the screening of the film, until a religious fanatic set it on fire, accusing it of being evil art, and they decided to remove it. The facehugger's eggs were manipulated with one hand when they opened, to give them that organic movement. The inside was filled with animal entrails to recreate the birth of the alien creature. The scene was recorded in reverse, and then projected in reverse to give the appearance of opening. H.G. Geiger's first designs for the facehuggers had to be modified because they were too large. Dan O'Bannon collaborated on the details, which would leave long fingers running sideways and a thinner, more flexible tail so it could fit into a person's mouth. The creature's interior was created with clams, oysters, and fish entrails. In a deleted scene, Sigourney Weaver had a confrontation with Lambert, but they couldn't act out the punches properly. Ridley Scott asked Veronica Cartwright to hit her for real, something that upset the actress a lot. This scene was included in a special cut in 2002, after the film was declared culturally and historically important by the U.S. Library of Congress and to be preserved in the National Film Registry. In another deleted scene, Ripley found Brett and Lieutenant Dallas still alive inside the cocoons, but it was ultimately discarded because it cut the climax of the escape from the ship about to explode. The scene of the birth of the larva from Kane's chest was one of the most important. 4 cameras were placed from different angles, and they had some problems because the shirt did not tear. The organs were created with animal visors. Although the actors knew about the shot since it was in the script, what the director had not told them was that they were going to be sprayed with artificial blood expelled with pressure bombs. Thus, they were able to obtain a much more realistic reaction to the situation. The scene was so realistic that many were traumatized, and it would be a topic of debate for Fox executives due to the classification they should give the film. All this added to the great performance of John Hurt, resulted in one of the most remembered scenes of all time.
His t-shirt pulled, tightly on it, and in there's going to be bloodlines on high pressure pumps. They're going to blow blood everywhere.
The design of the alien was directly inspired by Geiger's book called Necronomicon. Carlo Rambaldi was in charge of making the mechanisms for the movement of the head and mouth. Bolaji Badejo, a young man 2 meters and 8 centimeters tall, was the one who wore the Xenomorph suit. It is said that he was hired in a bar by a member of the production after seeing his thin appearance and long limbs. The suit was specially made for him. Although there were 2 other suits that were used by stunt doubles for scenes where the creature was hanging. The liquid that the Xenomorph gives off was large amounts of lubricant. That's how they achieved that slimy appearance. The final scene of the film would be the explosion of the Nostromo ship, however. Ridley Scott convinced the Fox executives to add a final act, so they had to extend the budget once again. The song that Ripley sings is "You Are My Lucky Star" by Francis Langford. The effect of the Narcissus's turbines turning on was recreated with lights and high-pressure water jets.
Thing into overdrive. The lights came on with the high-pressure hoses.
The water sprayed out, which made the lights much more intense.
The alien dropped out on its cable.
If you like this type of content, a like and subscription is appreciated. Leave me a comment about another movie you would like to know all the details and curiosities of the backstage. Until next time.